Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Story and I am part of the Outreach and Training team here at the Healthcare Authority. Today we would like to welcome you to our D1 worksheet guidance recording. So before we get started, I would like to introduce you to what we do in the Outreach and Training unit. The O&T unit is comprised of 3 separate teams. The first team provides training and support and develops and delivers informative presentations and recordings. The second team processes fused message requests, provides phone support, and does sub-account maintenance via SEBB My Account and the Pay One system. And the third team processes error corrections. These teams work together to assist you in your role in administering SEBB benefits to your employees. So now that we did our little introduction, let's go ahead and go over what we will learn today. So we already covered the About Us. Next, we're going to get into the worksheet guidance and what worksheets are really used for. Then we'll cover the SEBB organization guidance specific to the D1 worksheet. We'll go over some D1 worksheet scenarios, and then we'll wrap everything up with some reminders, tips, and resources. So when it comes to the worksheets, you can find information on what the worksheets are used for and why in WAC 182.31-030 and SEBB Policy 11-1. So the SEBB program provides worksheets to determine eligibility for the employer contribution towards SEBB benefits. These worksheets are used to facilitate decisions compliant with RCW and WAC, provide required notice and information to employees, confirm receipt of the required notice and information, and provide guidance and suggestions for the SEBB organization. So typically you would want the employee to physically sign and date the worksheet as receipt of notice. But you are able to email it also to the employee. So if you decide to email the worksheet to the employee, a copy of the read receipt can serve as the employee's signature and date. So once the worksheets have been completed, you would want to provide the employee a copy to review, sign, and date, and have them return that to you. You, the BA, would then sign and date and provide the completed signed copy to the employee. And you would also want to file a copy of the completed worksheet in the employee's file, just for records. And just a quick reminder to always complete these worksheets electronically. Always go out to the BA website and find the worksheet. Do not save them to your computer as they are updated often and we do not send out notice that they have been updated. So we ask that you always go out to the BA website and find the worksheet when you're needing it. So something I do want to point out that is unique to the D1 worksheet is there are 2 tabs on this worksheet when you open it up in Excel. There is the SEBB Org Guidance tab, and then there is the Eligibility Notification tab. The Eligibility Notification is the page you would actually fill out and provide to the employee. And the SEBB Org Guidance tab is there just because there are a lot of different moving parts when it comes to understanding and filling out the D1 worksheet. It provides the purpose of the worksheet, worksheet reminders, and guidance for regaining eligibility. Now the SEBB Org Guidance tab is there to help you, the BA, with completing the D1 worksheet and is not required to be given to the employee. You only need to give the Eligibility Notification tab or page to the employee. Now in the coming slides, we are going to review and really look at the SEBB Org Guidance tab and provide some examples. So when using the D1 worksheet, you do want to be mindful of 3 key factors. That first one is that you want to be sure that the employee did lose eligibility for the employer contribution due to going out on unapproved leave. You also want to know how long the break in coverage was for that employee, and if that employee enrolled in self-pay coverage while out on leave. And we'll look at these more in depth here in the coming slides. So you would want to use a D1 worksheet when you have an employee who lost eligibility for the employer contribution due to one of the following reasons we're going to cover next and is now returning to work. So that first reason could be leaving work on authorized leave without pay, workers' compensation, paid family and medical leave or PFML, which is not concurrent or overlaps with FMLA, a layoff that results in employment ending, being called to active military duty, applying for a disability retirement, or appealing a grievance. Now, next up, we're going to look at when you would not want to use a D1 worksheet. A D1 worksheet is not required if an employee does not establish eligibility when returning to work in the month of August and is not anticipated to be eligible for the employer contribution next year. You would not use a D1 worksheet in a scenario like this. You also would not want to use a D1 worksheet if an employee never lost eligibility for the employer contribution and remained enrolled in SEBB benefits this whole time. And lastly, you would not want to use a D1 worksheet if you have an employee who was not previously eligible and is now establishing eligibility upon returning from leave. That would be the D2 worksheet that you would want to use in that scenario. So let's talk about continuation coverage. So if an employee self-paid for continuation coverage or unpaid leave while ineligible for the employer contribution, the BA would want to provide O&T with the date the employee returned to work via FUSE. The SEBB program will then release the employee record to the SEBB organization. And then the BA would want to use the reason return from leave without pay, or LWOP, when claiming the employee's record in SEBB My Account. So let's talk about continuation coverage and when dependent verification documentation is not required and is required. So for employees who self-paid for continuation coverage or unpaid leave after losing eligibility for the employer contribution, and if they had dependents enrolled and maintained enrollment in SEBB benefits, they will not be required to submit dependent verification upon regaining eligibility. Okay. Now, employees who did not self-pay for continuation coverage after losing eligibility for the employer contribution, they will need to submit dependent verification if they're wanting to enroll their dependents in SEBB benefits upon regaining eligibility. So while we're on the subject of continuation coverage, let's talk about supplemental life and supplemental AD&D insurance. So employees who self-paid for this coverage while not eligible for the employer contribution will maintain that same level of coverage upon returning to work and regaining eligibility for that employer contribution. Now, employees who were eligible to continue this supplemental life and or supplemental AD&D insurance but decided to discontinue coverage, they must submit evidence of insurability, or better known as EOI, to the contracted vendor if re-enrolling when regaining eligibility for their employer contribution. Now, just a quick side note that if the employee is required to submit EOI, the supplemental insurance is not going to be effective until approved by that contracted vendor. So speaking of supplemental coverages, let's talk about supplemental long-term disability, or supplemental LTD. So an employee does not need to return a form indicating their supplemental LTD elections. It is up to the BA to review if the employee had supplemental LTD coverage prior to losing eligibility for that employer contribution. And for those employees who were previously enrolled in supplemental LTD, the BA will need to enroll the employee in coverage in SEBB My Account. And this supplemental LTD insurance coverage will be reinstated effective the first day of the month the employee regains eligibility for the employer contribution. So there is some action that's needing to be taken by the BA if an employee had supplemental LTD insurance prior to losing their eligibility for the employer contribution. Now let's take a look at what you would do in SEBB My Account if you run into this. So for supplemental LTD, to go ahead and get an employee re-enrolled, the benefit administrator will need to navigate to the employee's supplemental coverage tab that is highlighted here in the orange box. You would then want to click the radio button that says Enroll in Supplemental LTD, and then simply just click Submit, and that will go ahead and get the employee re-enrolled in supplemental LTD coverage. So for employees who are returning to work after a full month's break in coverage, their medical, dental, and vision is going to begin the first of the month following their return to work. That's as long as the SEBB organization anticipates that employee to be eligible for the employer contribution. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of what this would look like. So in this example, we have an employee who went out on leave without pay effective January 5th, with coverage terminating at the end of that month, so January 31st of 2021. Now let's say this employee returns to work on April 26th and is determined to be eligible for benefits. Now the date of eligibility would be April 26th, the day that they return to work and are declared to be eligible for the employer contribution, while coverage would be effective May 1st of 2021. In this scenario, the employee would receive new elections since they did experience a full month's break in coverage. So next up, let's go ahead and take a look at what happens if the employee does not complete their required elections or return the forms within their 31-day election period. So if an employee does not complete their required forms and get them turned into either the contracted vendor, their benefit administrator, or complete their elections in SEBB My account, they will be defaulted. So they have 31 days from the date that they are determined to be eligible for the employer contribution again to complete their elections, or they will be defaulted. So if an employee did not experience a full month's break in coverage, they will be reinstated into the elections and benefits that they previously had prior to losing their eligibility for the employer contribution. Now those benefits will be made effective the first of the month after their coverage was terminated. And in a scenario like this where they do not experience a full month's break in coverage, the employee would not receive new elections. Now, it is not required that the employee receive the D-1 worksheet in this scenario, but they should be notified that they will be reinstated in the coverage they had prior, so you can use the D-1 worksheet as that notification. Now, let's take a look at an example of what this would look like. So in this example, let's say we have an employee who loses eligibility for the employer contribution on June 10th. So that means that their coverage would be ending effective the last day of that month, so June 30th. Now let's say that that employee returns to work on July 19th and regains eligibility. So their eligibility date is going to be July 19th. But since they did not experience a full month's break in coverage, their coverage is going to be reinstated effective July 1st of 2021. So the first of the following month of the date that their coverage initially ended. So that's July 1st. All right, so now that we covered and broke down everything that is on the SEBB Board Guidance tab, I now want to go over a scenario with you and show you how you would fill out the D1 worksheet based off of this scenario. So our first scenario we'll be covering is someone who is not being allowed new elections. So we have John, and John lost eligibility for the employer contribution on February 20th of 2021 and is now returning to work on March 18th of 2021. So just be mindful there's not that full month's break in coverage, something to be thinking about. So he was called to active military duty, and when he went out on active military duty leave, he was provided the C1 worksheet due to no longer being anticipated to work the 630 hours and losing eligibility for that employer contribution. Now he is now returning to work and is anticipated to work 630 hours in the school year. So we need to complete and provide the D1 worksheet. So let's go ahead and go out to the BA website. I will show you where to find the worksheets, and then we'll go ahead and fill out the D1 worksheet based off of this scenario with John. All right, so let's go ahead and go out on the BA website and show you where the D series worksheets will be located. So I'm starting out on the SEBB BA homepage, and then on the bottom left-hand side, you can see a blue button. My cursor is going around it that says Employee Eligibility Tools and Worksheets. You would want to click that button, and that takes you to the web page where there's some guidance on the worksheets, and then it has all of our worksheets located here. So as I'm scrolling down, you can see that there's the determining eligibility guidance, some steps, and then it gets into the A series worksheets, the B series, the C series, and then of course the D series. So here is where all of our D series worksheets will be located. Here is the D1, and I already have it open and zoomed in, so I'm going to go ahead and get that opened up. When you first open the D1 worksheet, it is going to automatically open up the eligibility notification. And this is what you are going to fill out to provide the employee who is returning to work notice whether they're eligible or not, and some guidance on the next steps to take if they are. I do want to point out that on the bottom left-hand side, I have my cursor on a tab that says SEBB Board Guidance. So this worksheet has two different tabs. It has the Eligibility Notification tab, which we're on right now, and then there is the SEBB Org Guidance tab. And this is specifically for benefit administrators, and it provides some reminders and some guidance on how to fill out the D1 worksheet. The good news is that we already covered all of this verbiage and all of these guidance quotes and everything in the past slides on today's Staying Connected episode. But just know that this is here to refer to whenever you're filling out the D1 worksheet. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the Eligibility Notification tab and start to fill out the D1 worksheet for John, who is returning to work with us. So we know that his name is John. SEBB organization, this is going to be the name of your school district. I'm going to just use ABC Schools. The date the notice was provided to the employee, you'd want to put that date in. Now just notice that there is a bullet here, and it says that this notice should be provided to the employee within a reasonable time frame as part of the return to work process. If the employee is determined to be eligible, they must have no less than 10 calendar days after the date of receiving notice to elect coverage. If I were a BA, I would just make this a habit that you are giving this notification on the first day that the employee is returning to work. All right, so we know that John is returning to work on March 18th of 2021. So that is the date that we're going to provide John with this notice. So I go ahead and fill that out and I click Tab. And you can see that it brings us to section 1A for the first box where we need to input an answer. So let's scroll down a little bit. All right, so we have to say yes or no. And the question is the employee anticipated to work at least 630 hours in the school year? Or their work schedule, had it been in effect at the start of the school year, would have resulted in the employee being anticipated to work the minimum hours to meet SEBB eligibility for the employer contribution in the school year. Well, we know that John is anticipated to work 630 hours in the school year, so I'm going to put a Y for yes and hit Tab. All right, then that brings us to section 1B, where we need to input another yes or no, or a Y or N. So it says, previously lost the employer contribution by no longer being anticipated to work at least 630 hours due to leaving work for at least one of the following reasons. And you can see all of the reasons listed here. And we know that John was called to active military duty, and that is the first bullet on this list. So we are going to go ahead and put a Y and hit Tab. And then you can see that a yes populated right here. And that is because based on these two answers, it was determined that this employee, John, is eligible for the employer contribution. All right. So it says if you answered yes to all of the requirements in section 1, the employee is eligible for the employer contribution and to continue with section 3. And that is where our green box is now for us to input something here. So let's scroll down and read what we need to input. So it says date of eligibility. Enter the date in which the employee returned to work and then continue with section 4. So we know John returned to work on 3/18/21. So I input that date and click Tab, and it brings us to 4. It said, did the employee experience a full month's break in coverage? Yes or no? Well, because John had lost eligibility for the employer contribution on February 20th of 2021 and now is returning to work on March 18th of 2021, that's not quite a full month. So it says if the answer is no, the employee is reinstated with the same elections they had when their coverage was terminated. The effective date of coverage is the first day of the month following the date their coverage was terminated. And it says to enter this date in section 4A and then skip to section 6 as the employee will not be making new benefit elections. So if there was not a full month's break in coverage, the employee is reinstated. They do not get new elections, and the effective date is going to be the first day of the month following the date their coverage was terminated. Okay, so we're going to put an N in this section and hit tab, and it said to input the effective date of coverage in section 4A and then skip to 6. So in this scenario, John would have lost coverage on February 28th, and so the first of that next month is going to be March 1st. So John's coverage is going to be reinstated back to March 1st with no new elections. So I went ahead, I inputted that and hit tab, and it skips us down, and you can see here in section 5 that there is not a due date for new elections, and that's because John does not get new elections in this scenario because he is being reinstated into coverage. And then like we read, it said skip to section 6. So we scroll down to section 6, and that is the signature and date section. So this is where you would print out the notification or this page and have the employee sign in date. You would then sign, put your HCA code and date, and then you would want to provide a signed copy to the employee and then also put a copy in the employee's file for your records. Now we know in today's day and age that sometimes technology is the better route, and so you can send this via email to the employee. Just be sure that the read receipt is turned on so that you get a notification when it is read, and you can print that read receipt along with this notification that was sent to the employee. You can put that in their file, and that is sufficient enough as a signature. All right, so now that we just covered a scenario that does not allow new elections, I now want to go over a scenario that will allow new elections. So we have Debbie, and Debbie lost eligibility for the employer contribution on December 10th of 2020 and is returning to work on March 10th of 2021. Now we know that she went out on authorized leave without pay and was provided the C1 worksheet when going out on leave due to losing eligibility. Debbie is now returning to work and is anticipated to work 630 hours in the school year upon returning. And we also know that Debbie and her dependents were enrolled in continuation coverage while she was out on leave without pay. So that's another thing you want to be mindful of. So let's go ahead and go out to the D1 worksheet and complete it based off this scenario with Debbie. All right, so here we have a brand new D1 worksheet that is ready for us to start filling out. Before we fill it out based on the scenario that we just went over with Debbie, I do want to remind you that the D1 worksheet does have two tabs. So there is the actual eligibility notification tab that the BA would fill this out and provide to the employee as notification and guidance. And then there is the SEBB or guidance tab. And this is to provide guidance on how to fill out the D1 worksheet. So very important that you recognize that there are these two tabs. So let's go back to the eligibility notification and start to fill this out based on the scenario with Debbie. So we know that the employee name is Debbie. Our SEBB org today is going to be ABC Schools again. And the date the notice was provided to the employee. Remember I said in our last scenario that you would want to make this a good habit and give this notification to the employee, preferably on the day that they are returning to work. Okay, so Debbie's returning to work on March 10th. So let's go ahead and be sure to give Debbie this notification on March 10th, the date that she is returning to work. So I input that date and click tab, and that brings us to section 1A. So let's scroll down. So these are the requirements for maintaining or regaining eligibility. So yes or no, the employee is anticipated to work at least 630 hours in the school year, or their work schedule, had it been in effect at the start of the school year, would have resulted in the employee being anticipated to work the minimum hours to meet SEBB eligibility for the employer contribution in the school year. Well, we know that Debbie is anticipated to work 630 hours in the school year, so we're going to put a Y for yes and hit tab. And then it brings us to 1B. It says yes or no. Previously lost the employer contribution by no longer being anticipated to work at least 630 hours due to leaving work for at least one of the following reasons. We know that Debbie was out on leave without pay. So looking down this list, it looks like that is one of the reasons here, the second bullet. So we're going to put a Y for yes and hit tab. And then you can see here in section 2 that it was decided that based on the two answers above, that Debbie is eligible for the employer contribution and that we need to continue to section 3. So let's scroll down. Here is section 3 right here. Date of eligibility. So it says enter the date in which the employee returned to work. That is going to be the date they are eligible. So March 10th. And then it says continue with section 4. So I'm going to hit tab, and that brings us to section 4. It says, did the employee experience a full month's break in coverage? Yes or no? Well, we know that Debbie left work or lost eligibility for the employer contribution on December 10th of 2020 and is now returning to work on March 10th of 2021. So that's definitely more than a 1 month break in coverage. So we're going to go ahead and put yes, and you can see here it says if the answer is yes, coverage will become effective the first day of the month following the employee's return to work. Continue with section 4A. So I put in our Y and I'm going to hit tab. And that brings us to section 4A. It says enter the date in which coverage begins. See section above. Well, we just read the above section and it said that coverage is going to be effective the first day of the month following the employee's return to work. So since Debbie is returning to work on March 10th, that means that coverage is going to begin on April 1st. So let's input that date. And here's an important note here in section 4A. It says if the employee enrolled in SEBB continuation coverage, which we know that Debbie had herself and her dependents enrolled in continuation coverage, that coverage will need to be terminated before they will be enrolled in employee coverage. So that's something that Debbie would need to reach out to our continuation coverage customer service department and just be sure to terminate that continuation coverage to allow her enrollment in SEBB benefits again. All right, so we have 4/1/21 as the effective date. We're going to hit tab, and that brings us down to section 5. But let's see, it skipped over a little bit. So we have section 4B, and that is basic and supplemental life and AD&D insurance. And this is just some FYI for the employees, since this is a notification that we're giving them. But it states if the employee self-paid for supplemental life and or supplemental AD&D insurance coverage while on leave, they will maintain that level of coverage upon their return to work. So this is just an FYI for Debbie that if she was self-paying for supplemental life or AD&D, that she'll be able to maintain that coverage upon returning to work. And then section 4C here says for basic and supplemental long-term disability insurance that a school employee does not have to return a form indicating supplemental LTD insurance elections. Their supplemental LTD insurance will be automatically reinstated effective the first day of the month they regain eligibility for the employer contribution towards SEBB benefits. So remember, as we stated before when we were going through the guidance and the slides previous to this, that it is up to the BA to find out if the returning employee had supplemental LTD insurance, and if they did, to go ahead and get them enrolled so that they can be reinstated into that coverage that they previously had. All right, and then looking at section 5 here, form submission dates. So we have a due date of 4/10/21, and that is for medical, dental, and vision insurance for the enrollment forms to be received, or for Debbie to go ahead and complete the elections in SEBB My Account. So that's 4/10/2021. And then here is a section about dependent verification. The good news is that since Debbie and her dependents were enrolled in continuation coverage while she was out on leave without pay, she does not have to submit new dependent verification documents to get her dependents verified since they have had continuous coverage. But if, for instance, she was not enrolled in continuation coverage with her dependents, she would have to submit the new dependent verification documentation to get her dependents verified to be eligible for SEBB benefits. All right, and then scrolling down, oops, we have this important notice right here. It says enrollment forms must be received even if the employee chooses to waive medical coverage. Failure by the employee to return enrollment forms timely will result in enrollment as follows. And basically, the employee will be defaulted. But it's very important to note that any dependents will not be enrolled, and a $25 a month tobacco use premium surcharge will be incurred. So in Debbie's case, if she is wanting to have her dependents re-enrolled into SEBB Medical now that she is eligible again, she will need to be sure to take action, because if she fails to not take action within that 31 days, she will be defaulted, so she won't have a choice on what coverages she has, and her dependents will not be enrolled with her. So something that's very important for the employees to realize. And then we have section 6 here, our signature and date, and this is where you would print this out. You would have the employee sign in date. You, the BA, would also sign, put your HCA code and date as well. And like I said previously, you can always do the read receipt as well if you are emailing this to the employee rather than physically giving them the paper. Okay, so now that we went over some examples, scenarios, actually showed you how you would fill out the D1 worksheet according to the scenarios that we covered, let's go ahead and talk about some reminders, tips, and resources. So for benefit administrators, of course, we have the SEBB BA website. This is where you are going to go, and there's tons of resources on there, and this is also where you will find all of our worksheets. Of course, you can contact Outreach and Training by calling the 1-800-700-1555. And then we also have the Fuse secured messaging system that you're able to send in your questions or concerns to us that way. And just as a reminder that you should contact us with employee questions by either calling or using the Fuse secured messaging system. These resources are not for employees, and employees should not be contacting us directly. And with all of that being said, that now brings us to our summary slide, which means we are wrapping up today's recording. I hope that this D1 worksheet guidance recording comes in very helpful for you. Just keep in mind to always rely on that SEBB or guidance tab. That tab is really going to help you with filling out this D1 worksheet properly and providing the proper notice to your employees. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.